So this is Cyberlearning, Synthesis and Envisioning, the Survivors. So thanks all for your wonderful participation. And welcome again to people who are joining us on the webcast. We're going to do three things here. First, we're going to hear from the groups who have been working now for 2 days on the work they've produced. So we're going to have some report outs. The second thing we're going to do is have a town hall meeting to hear your ideas for how all of this could be done better, how could this community grow, and what can the CIRCL Center do to support all of you. And we had some wonderful conversations about that at our Meet the Projects meeting. I think those were really great. I got a ton of ideas, and I know each of the people who led and Meet the Projects want to thank you for the great ideas about how this could be a really useful resource. And then finally, third thing is we're just going to have some closing remarks about what's next and some thank yous. And then maybe we'll even get you out of here a little early. So thanks again for staying with us. Thanks to the webcast attendees for coming back. And here's Joyce Mallon-Smith, who's going to run this portion of the meeting.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We need the speakers to come here because this is where the webcast is coming. So, yeah.
You want me to come down too?
Well, you're okay.
Okay. So first we're going to hear from the group on reimagining school. How can cyberlearning research lead to transformations with a solid grounding in learning theory? Who is reporting on that topic?
Ben's going to be reporting, but he's out for cupcakes.
First we'll be hearing from the group on supporting discourse, expression, augmentation, and other forms of collective knowledge building in today's cyberlearning environments. This is... Okay, so we're going to revise that. We're going next to group one. Deeply fostering student reasoning via high-quality dynamic visual models, simulations, and immersive visual environments.
All right, so I have to see if this will actually view full screen. What? Yes, here we go. So our group was, as she mentioned, thinking about deeply fostering student reasoning via high-quality dynamic visual models, simulations, and immersive visual environments. We spent a while thinking about this. We thought in the largest sense, and then we came down to the ground and thought about some very specific but futuristic examples. And throughout all of it, we saw that after a while, the future will involve some very powerful learning opportunities. As we sketched it this morning, we imagined things like a simulation multiverse, online communal grand challenges that blur the real and virtual and engage students with real challenges in science and engineering. We painted a broad picture, and we realized that there will be some very powerful opportunities that will come out of the new evolution and the new kinds of opportunities that happen with simulations, models, visualizations, and the like. And we recognize that as the cyberlearning community, we have a duty that we need to, you in this chair, those chairs out there, are sitting there because we're looking forward to these opportunities. We're hoping to think about them, and we need to embrace those opportunities and the kinds of challenges that come along with them. As we thought about those opportunities, as we thought about the things that you and we need to do, we recognized that we're actually up against a significant barrier that's emerged as we've come along. As these tools and things have developed, and are developing even more, we're realizing that some things that weren't a problem before now are becoming issues for us. So we spent a good deal of the time this afternoon and a little bit this morning talking about what we're calling model illiteracy and data or data science illiteracy as problems that are emerging issues. It may not have been a problem before, but now that we're having to deal with models and simulations, students need to understand how those are created, what goes on underneath them, and designers need to understand how to both design them intently but also give students some agency within that. And the whole world of data, big data, brings along with it the question of data science education. And what do we really mean by that term? So those are emerging issues we will have to grapple with as a whole group, as a field, in order to understand what we can do to make the most of this opportunity. If we do, there's a lot that will be able to come of this. we can get to incredible new learning if we have this opportunity for new models, simulations, visualizations, rich data, and we have the tools, the literacy, and the understanding to get students to that point. And so we spent quite a while thinking about what that kind of looks like and what those opportunities are in terms of the concrete next steps. So as we thought about what it would look like, we recognized, we sort of sketched some specific parts of what this future looks like, and we used the 4 or 5M framework as we did this, saying that the future will involve melding lots of things together. It will involve mapping those modalities to learning goals. It will involve understanding how to measure learning that's going on, how to mine those data for the kinds of information that we need to inform the learning and to inform the design of learning opportunities. And it will involve then modifying and manipulating that environment, both in terms of its design, but also dynamically for the best of student learning, and then it's a virtuous cycle that goes back around. So we use that framework in general to help us think through these future opportunities. And then when we thought about specific next steps, and the answer is there are specific next steps possible here. Might be a big challenge, but we can make it one step at a time. And we got to the point where we said, there are some real things that we as a community can do in order to start to embrace this. We can start to understand what it means to deal with simulations. And one of the groups in our subgroup this afternoon talked about the need to convene a workshop that brought together gamers, simulation creators, and learning scientists and educators, and synthesized all of those points of view in one. So that's one concrete example that came out. We had another group that talked about the need for understanding what we mean by model literacy and the kind of agenda for learning sciences that would need to accompany that. And we had an anime group that grew out of a lunch discussion talking about what are the specific next steps for furthering data science education as something that is really critical. We've decided that anytime we start to say big data, we need to start to make the call for data science education as an arm of that problem. And the ways to deal with that range from the newly minted Journal of Data Science Education to and the International Conference for Data Science Education on through through the 4 or 5 part opinionator series in the New York Times talking about data science education through and podcasts and the like. So there needs to be some real public awareness, but also an academic arm to understanding this. We think it's a niche that needs to be filled. We think it's a clear opportunity for CIRCL. And as Jeremy starts to work on speakers next year for CIRCL, we're working on that. Some big things under the hood for that as well. So those are the next steps. We invite you to engage with that with us, and we think that there are some really great opportunities. And we recognize that 5 years is both a short and a really long time, and in internet years it's decades. So there will be a lot of change that happens, and we're ready to go for it.
Group 2, Reimagining School. How can cyberlearning research lead to transformations with a solid grounding in learning theories?
So we don't have slides, but some of us have cupcakes. I think that's better. Janet asked us to imagine the future, and so we want to talk about visions for what the future of school could be. We actually broke into 2 subgroups. The Rolling Stones subgroup, which was free of constraints of the current system, and then the Beatles group, which was more thinking about evolutionary steps forward. That said, the latter group was not entirely evolutionary, so we called ourselves the Stoned Beatles. We paid more attention to the next generation science standards than you might think based on that title, but we had some fun. And so this presentation is, as much as we can muster, a recombination of the ideas that emerged in both groups. There are ways in which the groups were a bit different, so the Stoned Beatles did think about how to align with standards, whereas the other folks did not, and we could talk about some of the other things later if people have questions. But here's what we came up with. And this vision is a vision for the whole school, potentially even a district level. It's not about individual teachers or classrooms. And I'll come back to this at the end because we are explicitly rejecting a scale-up model in this vision. We don't think you could do this piecemeal, one classroom, one teacher at a time. And we recognize that that presents a lot of challenges to cyber learning research, given the way that we typically conduct our design-based research studies. Now that said, we talked about it at sort of structural and activity levels. So at a structural level, we talked a lot about repurposing of time and of space inside the school to support student agency and to support student social impact on each other and on their communities and families. So it was very important to us to think about how to restructure the school so that students are driving the questions and the topics that are discussed, as well as the technologies that are used. We embraced wholeheartedly the idea of developing big ideas, maybe covering less stuff but getting at bigger ideas, through long-term participation in deep disciplinary practices, as praised by things like NGSS. But rather than just having the work stop at ideas, we wanted an impact on community, family, friends, and self to drive the work that would happen. So in our view, classrooms would become the loci for interest-driven units. That those loci, those classrooms, would be repurposed over time, over the course of the school year. That those spaces, those existing classrooms, would then become affinity spaces for joint work. They'd be spaces that were used by kids and their teachers when they need to be together. And those uses will be scheduled opportunistically, not a year in advance, or not purposely dedicating rooms to specific purposes. And those rooms might also have different representational purposes. So one room might be devoted to showing emergent knowledge of the group as a whole. Another might be devoted to particular sorts of activities at a sort of month-long time scale. And still others might have domain-specific resources, like measurement tools to use for different parts of science inquiry. And my laptop just went to sleep, so one moment. We see that this reconfiguration of space and of expectations for learning would also necessitate a change in the role of the teacher. So part of the teacher's responsibility, in fact, I would argue the primary responsibility, is to think about the continuous reconfiguration of that space in support of students' activity. So the differentiation of instruction would include the constant reconfiguration of space. Teachers' role would be to broker communications among students with similar questions and interests. It would be to design physical, material, and technological spaces to support projects and to encourage productivity in the role of a project manager. We imagine teachers identifying and curating resources related to student questions and interests. And those resources might be material, but they also might be connections with the outside world, such as experts who students could connect with, or even more senior students. If you have a 6th grader who might learn from an 8th grader, part of the teacher's responsibility is to help make those connections. We also think that a key aspect of teaching, one that many teachers already do, is to be an ally and an advocate for youth, and to help them to want to have an impact on the school and the community, and to believe that they're able to do it. One major shift that we saw is that teachers are no longer going to be the primary audience for students' work product. Instead, they're going to be a promoter who helps to create the external, real-world audience for learners' products, and where those audiences already exist, connect learners to them. UMedia, for example, I think has done a really nice job at thinking about how to do that. It might be a model that we could look at. So a big thing that we think needs to happen in order to enable teachers to do this is that they need a hell of a lot more time to reflect on what's happening and to figure out how to help students to do this. We don't think they can do it alone. We think there need to be organizational routines to be created to help teachers to do this in collaboration with one another. And as we'll get to in a bit, there are some other aspects of teacher thinking we talked about. Another high-level thing that we talked about is curriculum. And in our view, we see it as a matrix of big ideas and practices on one axis, and collections of facets associated with those topics on the other axis. So for example, you might have the big idea of infection, and facets of it might include studying mechanisms of transmission, or how we communicate about disease and health to the public, or how we react to infections, for example, by strategies like quarantine. And so you can imagine having a quarantine or disease reaction room where you're able to try out different approaches to intervention with rich simulation and data analysis tools. Over the course of time, and we see this as a design for something like a 3-year middle school, we would expect that students would develop evidence that they've had good coverage of the matrix of that space, the facets times topics space that I mentioned before. And that we might think about ways of certifying students' accomplishments in those with things akin to badges or other ways that show evidence of what students have accomplished and what they're capable of. We also imagine a new role for the guidance counselor in the school, and that might be to help students and teachers to navigate that matrix in an individually responsive way. We expect that students are negotiating that matrix. They're working in cross-age project teams based on their interests and based on their individual learning needs, their individual skills, and their cultural resources. We think that the school building itself could be used as an object of inquiry. And we think of that in two ways. The first is as a sort of projective participatory simulation into the space. You might think of some of Vanessa Kalila's work, some of Tom Moore's work in that regard. But you might also think of the building as a place where interesting biological and social systems are unfolding that students might study. So, for example, they might study where the most likely places to get infected with the cold in the school building are by collecting data throughout the building and mapping out patterns of infection. We like to imagine that that inquiry would actually stretch beyond the building itself to the community and students' homes where it's located. We think of kids as creatures that are moving between these different spaces. They're living in an ecology, and they could study that own ecology, that ecology they're a part of. Trying to figure out what to skip. So we would like to design units where kids can be doing that movement, can be collecting data across spaces and time and analyzing them. So imagine a unit where kids go beyond infection to enable kids to pose questions about their own health, their families, and their communities that are about things from disease to nutrition to exercise and to sleep. So imagine kids collecting data with their mobile devices about the sniffles and throat aches that they and their siblings have, logging what they're seeing in their friends. We'd not only have data about disease, but we'd have a social network of who hangs out with whom, and a resource that students could use to figure out, how does disease travel in our community? Who's more likely to get sick than other people? They could try to figure out how their cold turned into a flu, which doesn't really happen. They could use the network to realize they got infected twice. They could even investigate questions about, could my mom get sick from your mom if they've never met, by studying propagation of disease through the network. So I want to wrap up by saying, we think that a scale-up model would be insufficient to achieve this. This is a whole school vision that we can't do piecemeal, and we as a research community need to figure out how to do design-based research at that scale. And so what we would like to ask all of you who picked different thematic groups is, can you imagine reimagining school in your work? How would you do it? Thank you.
Thank you. And as we move from reimagining school, we move to group 3, supporting discourse, expression, argumentation, and other forms of collective knowledge building in today's cyber learning environments.
Okay, I'm Jamie Zhang from University of Albany. We have 2 leaders, but unfortunately have to leave early. So we're going to, work together to report out our work. So yesterday and today we spent quite some time to understand the different kind of designs and analysis of discourse, learning discourse in different environments. So it's amazing to see the diversity of designs and understanding, framing, and analysis, what it means to have a good discourse. And so we came up with this model to highlight the major component in the design space, including the structure, so the claim, counterclaim, data, evidence, different kind of component to represent what it means to have a argument, and then the content to address what kind of idea in the learning, and then the process, the temporal dynamic process that to play out. And this had to do with the time scale. So it can, the thing taking place today is going to affect how they engage in the kind of discourse in the later phase. And it can take place at different levels, from individual dais, small groups, to community, and even beyond. So we try, this is, just to highlight the component of discourse, both for design and also for analysis. Analysis would be looking into the structure, the content, the process at different levels across different timescales. And then, today in the morning and in the afternoon, we did some envisionment for, new possibilities of advancing learning discourse. And we did the envisionment along different lines. So I will talk about one possible vision, and then my colleagues, my peers, we're going to present others. So this vision is about a collaborative discourse and knowledge building online at a large scale. So it's echo the kind of challenge, the previous group just raised. Alternative to MOOC. If you look at the current learning discourse taking place, at this Cyberlearning event, we are all, excited to see the different opportunities developed by different research teams, the new tools, the new spaces, that, the new kind of learning activities. And on the other hand, if you look at each of the learning activities and tools, always have some kind of discourse, dialogue, that's going on surrounding, within, or it's to interconnect, different spaces. So how the discourse is designed. So currently, in a lot of spaces, the discourse tend to be more structured. So it's the activities, the discourse take place in different courses, course-based or content-based units. And each unit only lasts long, like a 1 week or 2 week long. And then in the different unit, different week, students use different kind of spaces, different kind of tool to engage in different activities. Discussion area, design, game, simulation, maybe as talking about a video case. So always have discourse, but discourse is in different spaces. And when we look at the assessment, so we look at how well you're performing in a course. So this is the current structure, the current kind of design, oftentimes lack sustained collective idea development over time. And one thing that moved beyond the individual unit is look at MOOCs. The MOOCs really moved to a higher level, but still it's quite structured, basically course and unit based. And then one of the vision we developed is to think about a possible learning science alternative to MOOC. So we can develop a kind of an interconnected platform that can interface discourse taking place in different spaces, different tools, different activities, like in simulation, maybe some in online collaboration platform together. So the students can really engage in theme-based, challenge-driven, interest-driven communities to address significant themes and develop ideas over time. So instead of asking, how well you're performing in a course, we can ask, what kind of progress we have made collectively in understand, this and that. So be it, wherever you develop the idea, maybe it's in the game, maybe it's in the simulation, but altogether we can provide this, idea flow and really provide a way to design, to interface, and also to analyze. Thank you.
Hi, I'm just going to read some research questions. So if you think of discourse as things like sketches, gesture, animation, simulation, or video, these are ways that learners know or show things that are difficult to know or show verbally that computation can enable, enhance, and archive in new ways. We're interested in how we can analyze and support that kind of discourse in learning environments. So some design challenges. How do we design for students so that they learn to use these forms of discourse for learning content, process, or structure in a community of practice? How do we make sense of and track their learning in these modalities? How do we support the classroom ecology in a way that values these forms of discourse? Analytic challenges. How do we communicate, capture, and analyze these forms of discourse? How do we move across modalities? What are the effects? How can you track discourse that moves across and manifests differently across these forms? And what are aspects of discursive activity in those modalities that matter for different audiences, for learners, within the tools themselves, for teachers, and for researchers? I think this can help. Great.
Hello, I'm Kevin Ashley from the University of Pittsburgh, a third vision that we formulated was for argument-informed assessment and analysis of instructional data. The opportunity we see is to develop tools for argument-informed assessment and analysis of instructional data, including annotations of argumentation texts as students make or reconstruct arguments, analysis of videos of arguments for purposes of helping teachers to learn to identify salient argument features, identification of and the identification of and the emergence of concepts in the process of dialogue, and rubrics for critiquing argument structure and the content of the arguments. We think that the instructional data that's being generated even now by cyberlearning projects is an unparalleled resource for training teachers to recognize the kinds of reasoning and arguments students make naturally and with instruction, for providing positive and negative examples, for helping students to analyze and improve their own reasoning and argumentation, and to enable machine learning of patterns of argumentation for purposes of extracting reasoning and arguments from texts and videos by improving the approach in Watson, for example. And we think that this community is the community that can figure out how to structure the data and make it available publicly for those who want to do this kind of analysis. Right.
Thank you, Group 3. Supporting Discourse was a very interesting bridge from reimagining schools to our next group, which is Group 4, that focused on informal learning, the cutting edge of informal learning, makers, mobile, and more.
Okay. Great. So I'm Sherry Shee from UC Berkeley Lawrence Hall of Science, and this is H. Chad Lane from USC. And we're going to do this together because this is how informal learning people do things. I wanted to say that we had a really interesting group, and we spent some time kind of inventing new technologies. The outdoor intelligent mobile experience finder attached to Google Glass. We also talked about scanning your colon and 3D printing it so you can do a quantified self. But anyhow, really kind of interesting things. So with that, I just want to say that, oops, let me scroll down on, do I have control of this? Could you drive, please?
Yep, you got it.
Okay. So, what I want to say is, we're...
All right.
Okay.
Not responding.
That's good.
Well, our first question was, why are we different? Why is our group necessary? What's special about what we do in informal education? And if we could, well, we can read from this.
We can read from this with the
Sure. So one of the things that makes informal education different is how serious non-cognitive factors are considered, both from the beginning through the end. So we address or invite interest, sparking interest, promoting continued pursuit of knowledge, deep engagement. We address positive emotions, support identity exploration and formation. We also take social interaction and co-creation very seriously, emergent learning, participatory learning, public engagement. And finally, we have to evaluate all of this mess, which is also a unique challenge.
Right, so the unique challenge is that we pose very interesting questions for assessment that is both life-wide, lifelong, very deep, and not necessarily around content gains.
Everything's locking up.
Okay. I can actually connect my laptop here, but we'll lose a minute. Okay, so the other thing to recognize is that as we started thinking about what could CIRCL help us with, is our analogy for CIRCL was that it was like the App Store or like Stack Overflow. And it's a community for cyber learning where one could use it as a place to share worked examples. You could look at contrasting cases. We could share profiles of learners and personas of learners. We could also, for those people who don't have access to developers, could find developers on there. There might be a bank of assessment tools and evaluation tools there. And that it would be important to be able to share white papers on areas that were really of interest to people, like interest development, looking at curiosity, emotional interfaces, citizen science tools. I'll cover this one.
You better do that one.
Okay, so our other thing, other than saying that we're different, is that it's the process, stupid, is our in quotes, which is the idea that it would be important to document the life cycle of a design project. And so being able to share, in the same way that Stack Overflow shares examples in progress, that CIRCL might be a place to share pieces of code, pieces of projects that were intermediate products, and be able to share that online and necessarily design it for reuse. So thinking of it as a digital commons. And documenting a process and coming up with a toolkit that one could document these designs, and we liked the idea of Design Loft as one example for doing that. Another way of documenting our work is that everyone's very busy. So one idea was to do sort of a graduate student postdoc exchange, or having CIRCL fund some incentives for having people whose role is to go and learn and spend some time in another place and bring that knowledge back and do some sharing. Want to talk about the next steps?
Sure. We also discussed maker events, what kind of learning is happening in maker events. So the proposal was made to actually host a maker event at the next summit, to hold in parallel with everything we do here, to think about the learning that might happen in such settings and how we might leverage that. And then, I'm not sure what that was.
Okay, right. So in addition to just sharing the tools, so at this meeting, be able to bring your tools and share them, is one idea that emerged was being able to organize a VC panel and to bring venture capital so they could weigh in on ideas as well. And I guess in terms of things that people wanted to work on, that was the doing some sort of maker event and having this group, the informal, help plan that and help to bring some of those technologies to bear to share.
We also discussed a great deal about everyday learning that's just happening that's outside of our influence. Games like Minecraft, and understanding what's going on in those and connecting the work we do in informal learning to those kinds of learning.
We had some really awesome slides. They'll be.
Can we ask Group 5 to bring your laptop up when you come up to present? And next we will be hearing from Group 5 on big data and learning.
All right, it's going to take me a moment. I'll tell jokes while we do that.
I can dance.
And Andrew can dance.
We did have tap dancing YouTube videos going on during our presentation, so maybe that's different from all your other groups. I'm sure.
Now, when I think of big data, coming from the world of climate science, it's not dissimilar. We have lots of data. We have lots of data, and we have to mold all that data into central databases so that we can run models. And there's controversial outcomes. So in a lot of respects, we have a lot in common with this field. I've lost my slides. I lost my laptop here. It's over there. How do I get there? There I am. This is going to require some coordination, and so everybody help me here.
There you go.
PowerPoint. And in PowerPoint, a recent file, no doubt. Big data. Okay, hold on. I know where it's at. You've got to go to you and you. Voila. Voila. Cha-ching. All right. So, big data, Andrew is going to help me here because this is not my field, so I'm going to say things, and then he's going to interpret them. Spin control on what I'm talking about here, all right? First of all, yes, I mean, it's kind of big data. Of course, in the weather world, this is kind of small data, but well, it is big data, but more importantly, it's kind of messy data. It's not, nice data coming from instruments that are out in the field. We know exactly where they are, and we know how the weather is changing those places, but you deal with people, for God's sake, so you've got far more challenges than I have in my field. So we start with grousings. And this is my kind of challenges, I suppose, is we have data coming from multiple sources and trying to think about how do we map all these things together so they become meaningful between one application and another. So I have data coming from lecture tools, and there's other data coming from Google, and there's stuff coming from Facebook, and all sorts of other things which are clearly influencing whether these students are learning or not, how they feel, what their emotions are. Clearly, I think, influence. How do we collect that data and put it together into one place that makes sense? Is that?
Yeah, the history too of thinking about state data systems and then mobility rates within districts. So all of the problems that we deal with on a day-to-day data collection sort of process gets magnified as we start to think about how student IDs switch from application to application, data set to data set, location to location.
But opportunities abound here because we're going to be collecting data, for example, in the university world, maybe similar disciplines teaching in different courses, different places. Can we start comparing how students are doing in different environments and how is the different learning in any way related to how the class is being conducted? These are opportunities. I should point out, by the way, we're talking about student data, but with lecture tools, we know how you're teaching. We know what slides you're showing. We know what questions you're asking. We know how class is being conducted. So in effect, we could also be assessing your teaching as well as the students' learning, which may cause some heartburn. Impacts. Many things we need to do here to improve impacts. I mean, you might want to speak to the first one.
Yeah, so one of the issues right now is that a lot of the systems out there simply are not doing a good job collecting the data that they have access to. So a lot of it just goes into the diaspora, never to be logged or stored in any meaningful way. So in order to retrieve something, you need to have stored it in an interesting and usable way. And a lot of places simply aren't thinking about that. It's a lot of focus on the user experience without that much focus on what's happening with all the clicks that one could potentially be collecting and then querying later on for analysis for analytical purposes.
And the second one, I have feet in both camps. Certainly a university professor for the day job, and then have commercial businesses running software on the other foot. So I know that there are other groups out there, apart from us, that are building tools and who are collecting data, some of which is proprietary. I know, talking to the CIOs of universities, that they're demanding that these data be available to the universities should the university use the tools. So we have to interface with the industry and tell them not more than just give us the data. Here's how we would like to get the data, or here's what's important to us, and to build the bridges with the industry to get access to those data. I think they're open to it. We just have to make sure that communication is ongoing.
And Cyberlearning has a place in this sort of a capacity building end in terms of the back-end data dictionary, and then also in terms of that interface with industry. Cyberlearning is uniquely positioned to provide that interface, along with providing the opportunity to both discuss and provide a central location for pushing out a message related to big data. Instead of just simply relying on the rhetoric and the promise of big data, potentially identifying where it's been useful in certain contexts, what are reasonable expectations for the future. So it's not going to reform education, it's going to do what? It's not going to change universities, it's going to do what? So trying to find a way to balance what those expectations are with where we are with analytical models and data collection techniques. CIRCL has a unique sort of position with its place sitting with both researchers, industry representatives, and then schools and other partners to provide a way to craft that common message and be a location where folks who are on the front lines of the data sciences can actually be working with those who care about this issue and want to see it move forward.
And part and parcel with that is identifying conferences where we can sit down with these other parties and have those conversations. We have to break out of the mold of just being, the university NSF group, or this isn't going to work. So you have to reach out through a variety of means here. And I couldn't be university faculty without saying we have to start preparing the next generation of data scientists, because some of us are getting old, or and thinking about how we can hand this on to the next set of people. So how are we structuring programs in our universities? How are we training the right kinds of people to take on the challenge next?
And looking at some of the potential projects that are being done, identifying ways that we can work in collaboration with existing EXP, INDP projects to figure out, so you have data that you're collecting, you might not be thinking about turning it over to a particular stakeholder part of your study. The Cyberlearning group might be a place for you to have a value add to the research that you're conducting. Oh, you're doing this with this nice geometry piece of software. Have you thought about taking that data and displaying it to students? So we could be a location for that next little bit that you could add to the study in making the data that you're collecting more useful for various stakeholders.
And likewise, to grow the community, number 6, we need to think about offering some guidance to others who might want to be proposing into this area, who have expertise outside of our current group. How do we reach out and offer them guidance about making proposals, what needs to be in proposals, how to go about that? And so what we do next, first of all, we're thinking about some matchmaking. So if I'm doing my project and I'm trying to find somebody who knows about the data mining, or I'm trying to find some programmer, there'd be some way for us to find those people. Maybe a LinkedIn group is one option. There might be other ways to do that, but that's certainly a role we think CIRCL could help with. Communicating with industry, we've already talked about. There's a meeting in Silicon Valley in January. We think that'd be a great time to sit down with industry people and have the group hug and start thinking about what's possible here between the various groups. And we just start identifying other symposiums and meetings that we might want to start going to, and offering to sit down and have a big data meeting at each of these and talk with the people who are there about your problems and how our problems and the commonality among those issues. Anything else?
No, I think there are successful communities that I think Cyberlearning could be another hub to bring them together. So there are data mining groups, there are learning analytics groups, there are those at Stanford and there in Michigan and Carnegie Mellon. Cyberlearning with the branding of NSF can be a useful sort of hub for bringing these various groups together to talk about these issues in serious ways. They've been successful examples so far at AERA. Those are some of the more successful presentations that happened last in San Francisco. So there are sort of touchstones for what a successful big data presentation and symposium can look like, and we'd be able to take advantage of that and build the community further.
Lastly, a pitch for the entrepreneurs. There are, at every university, you've got student entrepreneurs who they think they know education. They want to be involved in educational startups. You need to make opportunities for them, guidelines basically for that road about what you can and can't do and where to go to get resources. Again, I think CIRCL could play a huge role here, reaching out to both the SBIR programs, I-Corps programs, through the SIA, et cetera, to make information available to those parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Group 5. Next, we'll hear from Group 6 that focused on engagement.
Okay, so this might be a little odd in a summit on cyber learning, but we decided to call the synthesis of our group meeting, Learning is Not Enough. And so we added engagement, identity, motivation, affect, affiliation, aspiration, etc. And this was our group. Okay. So in answer to Ben's question about whether or not any of the other groups could envision themselves as part of the challenge for reimagining schools, the answer from our group is profoundly yes, for the following reasons. We see that there are two basic challenges to incorporating a serious focus on identity, affiliation, affect, etc., not just as sort of artifacts or nice outcomes, but not really the point of learning in schools and other spaces. And that is the following. Focusing on individual development requires opening up the space of learning outcomes to include affect affiliation, identification, etc. as goals in and of themselves, rather than just as sort of hooks for standard curricular content, right? We have this sort of tendency to say, what are kids interested in? What are their identities? Oh, good, let's leverage that to help them learn about stoichiometry, whatever the heck it is, right? That seems like a really sort of far transfer problem. But this is the way we tend to typically approach this sort of issue, and we wanted to alter that sort of typical model. And then the second thing is that when we talk about scale, when you're concerned with something that is a highly individual proposition, notions of scale have to change from this sort of sense of we're going to find a universal model that works for everyone and then apply it to everyone, to what we call designing for the long tail of engagement and activity, such that when you think of the notion of more or bigger actually means more possibilities for self-design rather than more implementation of one design. Okay. And so then we sort of came up with, given that those are the challenges, what are the kinds of assertions that go on behind this work in focusing on identity, engagement, affiliation, etc. And so one is that access to knowledge is not enough. Just because you now know something about, say, a possible career or an area of domain that you didn't know about before, that's not enough, right? So identity development and having that sort of imagined futures of, oh, hey, that might be for me, right, requires access to people, models of practice and products, and to a community of practice. So just knowing about something isn't sufficient. And that engagement and identity have both a teleological endpoint, but are also relevant to day-to-day life. So in other words, if we were thinking about sort of Jim G's notion of identity as being a certain kind of person, you might think about, I want to be this kind of person someday, in terms of sort of an imagined futures, what's my identity as, potentially a scientist or an artist or a designer or whatever. But then there's also a sense of, I am this kind of person now. Right? Strengthening and building up existing identities is important for supporting learners in their current state. And then face-to-face and local experiences, and then virtual and distance experiences need to be integrated and impact one another in order to be highly relevant for identity. And so we feel like we need to know, how does that happen? And how can we create designs that help make that interaction and impact productive? So then what we did in our group is, rather than sort of list a whole bunch of research questions that we didn't answer, we decided to come up with 2 potential design cases. Just to sort of say, well, we might design something like this, or we might design something like that. And so I'll share those with you now. Okay. So we had sort of model number 1, which is a sort of self-story archive and connectedness sort of framework. And this came out of the question of how do we create resilient, determined, confident learners, right? So we talked a lot about what makes for successful learners. And so we sort of had this notion of self-story and narrative as being important, how the story you tell about the kind of person you are, about successes and challenges that would be archived but then searchable on a local level, based on sort of topical affinity groups, on a developmental level, etc. We talked about sort of finding your people as being important and being inspired by the stories of others, as well as articulating your own story. And we sort of thought about, is everybody familiar with the sort of It Gets Better movement? Yes? No? Mostly? Okay. Show of hands. Do I need to explain it? Pretty much everybody. No? Okay. So maybe not. It Gets Better is an archive of short videos, okay, that was originally put together by Dan Savage and just sort of grew into this massive social movement of people who were queer and bullied or had a really hard time as children, then describing It Gets Better as an adult, as sort of a response to the sort of rash of queer kid suicides, right, thinking it's never going to get any better than this. Right, so this is a series of stories about overcoming challenges, right? So we thought about that as sort of this early model kind of case, but with the possibility for local and distance actually connections among storytellers, continued engagement, the opportunity to continually revise and retell your story as sort of it actually does get better, so it then reflects the sort of change over time. And then the vision model 2 we called Spark, right? And this idea of the imagined future, right? And we talked a lot about the fact that underserved kids really tend not to know a whole lot about what the possibilities are outside of their immediate environment and the immediate people that they have access to. And so we were thinking about a cyber infrastructure that could curate the kinds of what we were calling Spark experiences, right? You get sort of a little window into, here are some people who do this thing, like whether it's, game design or entomology or, all sorts of, weather sciences, like all sorts of things. Some of which may lead to deep engagement, and some of which might just be, okay, that was interesting, that's cool, now I know something about that, move on. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? But that once a student would select something as being something they wanted to deeply engage with, deep engagement would open up this path to that sort of 10,000 hours kind of experience, sustained inquiry, mentoring with actual people, collaboration, etc. And that both of these experiences, the sort of the Spark experience and the deep experience, draw on materials, tools, people, mentors, infrastructure, but at different levels and time scales, depending on whether you're having just the Spark experience or the deep engagement. And then we also finally wanted to assert that there is in fact value in a variety of Spark experiences, as well as that deep engagement. Okay. So what are we designing through all of this? We're designing resources, designing relationships, designing multiple outcomes, designing educators, designing communities, and finally designing selves. So Janet told us we had to put together a list of concrete products, so we did. The International Journal of Learning and Media regularly hosts a section of their journal called the Missive article, and we felt like we were making enough sort of direct assertions that this could turn into a missive. A session at ICLS in that, the title of the conference theme is in fact learning and becoming in practice. So we thought that, went really well with our sort of focus on becoming. And then we really liked the Spark idea. And we thought that, maybe at some point after, these various other kinds of conversations, we might at some point put together a CAP proposal and think about working together toward that end. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I want to thank the groups for working so hard and over such a sustained time. And it just occurred to me in listening to those that we could have put them in a slightly different order, and it actually kind of makes sense. They all kind of fit together in a very nice way. And so here's what was going through my mind. We had two groups that focused on environments, and both are focusing on environments under transformation. How could we repurpose the space of school, and how could we repurpose informal from going to museums to making? But those are two really important spaces that we are connecting in cyber learning. And then it occurred to me that there are some, and Janet has been very clear about this, it isn't cyber learning if it's not deeply about learning. And this community is clearly bringing in two important focuses into how we analyze learning. There's the focus on argumentation and reasoning, and getting better across all these environments at analyzing the part of what's going on that's discourse, and using that for assessment, using that to improve it. But we have to get better across all the things we're doing. And the second one is really getting serious about identity, which is what we just heard from Cynthia Carter-Ching, and how all these environments support that. So those are the learning aspects that are new to cyber learning. And finally, we had two that were very clearly meeting each other about data. So we need data that is for the improvement of learning systems and big data, and it's going to be in connection with industry, and we heard all that. And then we need data science for kids, because kids too are living in these rich simulations, and they're not going to be as good at making sense of these tools unless we start building data science education for them. And so I loved what Bill and Chad were saying. Every time you say big data, say data science education in your second sentence. And so to me that's really rewarding, because we have started to articulate what cyber learning is. It's environments, it's data, and it's really deeply analyzing learning in these ways we know to be important, with identity and argumentation both coming to the fore, as well as all the things we already know about how to analyze learning that will still be there. So I just want to share that as seeming to be an emergent direction at the end of these 2 hard days of work. And I also want to take the time to thank everyone explicitly who led teams in the hard work of this. And I know Janet's going to take a moment to thank some people too. But so I want to thank Chad and Bill for leading the group on the simulations, Tom Moore, Ben Shapiro, Noah Ennedy, and Andy Rubin, Sherry Shee and Daryl Porcello, Perry Sampson for stepping up to lead the data group with a very different kind of data, and Cynthia Carter-Ching and Joe Pullman for leading that group. And while I'm at it, to thank all the folks who led big idea groups yesterday. Bev Wolf, Cynthia also did one of those, Sharon Derry and Alan Hackbarth, Erica Halverson, Ed Dieterle, and Marianne Bakia. Let me invite Janet up. Let's give a round of applause to all those leaders. And let me invite Janet up for a few thank yous too.
So I want to start by thanking the people from SRI and EDC for putting all of this together in a very short amount of time and really making it work. I think everybody did some really wonderful work here today. I think we got it was great. It has been great. And I want to thank all of you who are still left here, but the others too, but especially those of you who can't go home yet. I want to thank all of you for all the hard work you've done, because, you know, this was not a PI meeting. This was a really working hard meeting. We didn't make you prepare anything for it. Somebody thanked me for that. We didn't make you prepare anything for it, but we worked you hard the whole time you were here. I had such great discussions with people, and I had such a good time going around from room to room, table to table, wow, it was, and these presentations, I mean, there was just so much good stuff in those. So I want to thank all of you for that. And there were many NSF program officers here over the course of the 2 days. There are only 2 here now. We have Debbie Lockhart up here. Would you kind of stand up so people can see you? And we have Eamon Kelly at the back. So Debbie's part of SISE, Computer and Information Science and Engineering, the Deputy Division Director in Information and Intelligence Systems. And Eamon is here for the summer in Reese. In Reese. Real. I don't know if it was renamed yet. So the Reese Real program that are part of DRL. Also during the day, Barry Sloan was here. He's also part of Real. Elizabeth Vanderputten was here for a lot of the 2 days. She's with DRK-12. And John Chernyavsky was here. He was with a bunch of those programs. He was the interim division director, and he's now kind of an expert on, and a senior advisor to the director of EHR, of Education and Human Resources. And in fact, John and Elizabeth are in the Cyberlearning working group that actually, helps us figure out what we're going to be doing next, put the panels together, who we're going to fund, all of that stuff. Who else, what other program officers were here during the 2 days? Did any of you remember? Janice Earl was here for a while. Andres was here. I don't know who else was here. I'm sorry I didn't introduce them all while they were here. I did. Whatever. I'm sorry. I'll say so. I'm sorry to them as well. And let's see, what else?
So what we want to do as we wrap up is to invite you all to participate now in a town hall meeting, because we really want to hear your ideas after this experience about what we could do to make CIRCL a community that adds to what you all are each individually doing in your projects and teams. So we have a mic, and it's sort of open mic time to hear your ideas about the future. And Sarita, do you have a mic back there you can help pass around? They're both up here. Okay, so great. Marianne's going to take one, and Yeah, we just welcome your thoughts on things CIRCL could be doing, things that are working, things you'd like to see going forward, and how we could all be an effective community together. So, thanks.
Okay, so one idea we the different groups talk about is how to better connect the different research projects that can come together to really achieve the broader vision of this cyberlearning field. Of course, we need connection in research. We need to, learn from each other, and then others, interconnect between the technologies, the platform, the tools. I think maybe CIRCL can do something. Like, I guess a lot of the tools will be open source, but it will be open source in different website, post somewhere. It would be really interesting, at least have a space that a collective list of the different tools that we can possibly share the tool, maybe possible also the code, and build interface and ways to interconnect. And the other thing that I'm not sure, it has been hard to interoperate, different platforms. And if there's some kind of existing basic standard that can, provide API or something that can make the interoperation easier, it would be really helpful.
Great. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I didn't say that earlier. I really liked the idea of affinity groups and people being able to break up and talk in smaller groups. I felt that was really productive, but I think a lot of us identified with more than one. So I wonder if it would be cool to have 2 or 3 different chances to meet with different affinity groups or identify with multiple ones, and I think that would help with crosstalk too.
Thanks.
I'm not sure this is something a resource center could do or not, but I'm thinking there's a lot of ideas here that it would be nice to bring the public along with us in this thinking about learning. And so how could we do public engagement around the ideas we have about productive learning using cyber? I think parents and schools and all of us could learn about these ideas of motivation, identity, and interest, and how can some of the research and the projects be used as exemplars that we can start a public discourse around.
Yes, definitely. It's definitely something we want to do is ways to share what we're doing to the public and help each of your voices. That's the amplify the voice part. Absolutely. Thanks. Do we have any comments online? Not yet. Okay. You can tweet, and Judy is going to retweet verbally to the room. She will be your spokesman.
I'm Bill Finzer. I also work for McGraw-Hill Education, a commercial publisher. And there is a big gap between what we're talking about here and what publishers think about and know how to do. I suspect that's not only true of McGraw-Hill, but others. And so I urge us as a community to reach out to the commercial world because there's stuff happening out there that you'd be interested in, and vice versa. And I don't know how CIRCL can do that, but I urge you to think about it.
And Judy says we can also take emails to circleinfo@sri.com as a way to get messages. circle-info@sri.com.
So it strikes me that a lot of us do our work in what we would call Pester's quadrant. We're trying to both, further theory, but also make things that are applicable. Do we have a good mechanism for listening to the problems of the people that we're trying to innovate for? I mean, do we have a way of letting their voices be heard, letting them submit suggestions to us? Just a question.
Good. I like that.
I think on a related note to that, it's a bit striking that there aren't teachers in the room during our envisioning meetings. So I am wondering how we could engage with, well, there aren't enough teachers in the room, right? So I wonder how we engage with those instructors who are out there and those high school and middle school and K-12 teachers who are out there who want to do something more and want to engage in cyber learning work, but don't have the partnerships that those that we all work with have. So how, through perhaps CIRCL, could those teachers find one of us to get engaged in a project and be part of the community? Because I think when we disconnect from that in our envisioning discussions, we sort of lose the opportunity to keep it focused on learning and teaching about the things that we care about most.
Great, thanks.
To expand on that also, students, we need some students to be part of this conversation to make this effective. But with saying something that might be naive, but I'm guessing that there are people in the health fields and in other fields like climate who are far down the road in terms of data analysis and big data interpretation that might be fun to sit down with and get lessons learned from them so we don't just duplicate what's been done.
Thank you.
I just want to respond to what Perry said and let you know about a program at NSF. What's it called? Big Data in Education, something like that. There's going to be something called an Ideas Lab in October that's going to be all about using big data in education. And I want to encourage all of you to look at that, see if it's something that you're interested in. We'll be accepting proposals from people who put them together during the week-long Ideas Lab and also from people who are not there. But I'm just magnifying what you said and saying, you know, yeah, that's right, and here's an opportunity.
Well, one thing CIRCL should do is be a place that disseminates these related opportunities.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that
Okay.
gives me an idea further.
Yeah.
Like we should be publicizing that to this group.
Stephanie Teasley from Michigan. I just want to back up two comments. I agree that, well, certainly that students could and should be present, but teachers, the one thing I want to caution us to think about when we think about inviting teachers in is a lot of learning scientists do work very closely with teachers in classrooms, which I think is great. But what I'm worried about is that a lot of our work really follows something that, a term that I heard that I really love called artisanal teaching. So if you think about artisanal cheese and artisanal chocolate, I wonder how many of our research results are really based on us having partnered with this kind of artisanal teaching. And so I think when we're thinking about bringing practitioners into the room, let's take some care not to privilege the kind of teachers that we typically work with and really think about really the average.
So then the issue, Jeremy, I think becomes that how do we help teachers who are not the ones who are in an environment? I mean, Brian, you said something about that before, but how do we help teachers who are not in an environment that helps them imagine, you know, what's possible?
Yeah.
But who could do a really good job of that?
Yeah.
How can we help them to join up with us? And yeah, so I should tell you also that I have a teacher joining me next year. Who will be, at least part of her responsibilities will be to translate some of the things that people in this community are doing into, you know, layperson speak, okay? And, you know, and get more teachers excited about this stuff. So we'll make room for the things she does on the website that Jeremy and company are putting together.
I wanted to go in a slightly different direction with something that, just to amplify something that came from one of the circles just before lunch. We recognized in our discussion that cyberlearning is in a somewhat, well, I don't like to modify unique, but in an almost unique position in programs at NSF by having this connection to size and having the connection to building technologies along with the learning sciences. And that because of that and because of the many opportunities of common desires to share some of the work that we're doing, there's a potential for sharing, building, mixing, mashing up kinds of tools that exist in cyber learning that doesn't exist in many other places. And so we were calling, both for the general fostering of that with CIRCL, but also for the concrete. And we thought, a cyber learning hack day associated with, conferences or things like this, where people brought their tools together and actually started to connect them up, could be a very concrete way to help people understand the interconnections and foster new synergies in a way that was both concrete and exciting. And we want to see that happen.
Cool. Cyber Learning Hack Day. Patty's ready. Is the area for the website built for that yet? Yeah, anyone else has something to say? I don't want to drag it out unnecessarily. Did we get anyone writing in, Judy? Okay, that's fine. Great. Terrific. So let's really wrap up then, because everyone has worked really hard. So just some reminders in closing about what comes next. So one thing is Janet has let us know that there will be additional cyber learning calls that will come out. And so there's next in the NSF program. We've talked about a couple of meetings that will be coming up. We're going to plan a Silicon Valley meeting, and I like the ideas of the data group to focus on some of that there. That'll be a high-interest topic for that. And also we're talking about a summit, which will be about a year from now, and that really is more of a, what do we know, public dissemination opportunity. And people have commented on how useful those nicely produced talks are, both to audiences but also to their careers, to produce those talks and have something to show of what their ideas really look like in a sort of crystalline form. We also will be asking your projects to provide us with more information. We will try to do that in the most well-organized and least annoying way we can. But being part of this community is to share with us what we can glean from abstracts is just too thin to really represent the work you're all doing, to represent it well. So we'll need some more in order to really showcase. One of the things I heard from the discussion group I was in is showcasing your partners, because you're working with wonderful partners, and if we share who it is you're doing this work with, it gives the work a whole different flavor than if it's just universities and nonprofits doing it. It just casts a different light on the meaning and the impact of this work when we're really clear about who we're doing it with. So we will be asking you for additional data. And we will be working with NSF as well to really understand how we can share this program in its best light to all their accountability folks up the line, so the program can keep being well respected and grow and thrive. Set of programs, yeah, absolutely. Right, because cyber learning, again, referring back to our circles, there's cyber learning transforming education, but this CIRCL Center reaches into DRK-12 and supports those cyber learning efforts throughout, and has been supported by those programs. So there's a bunch of next steps, and we look forward to seeing you virtually and in person at future events, and to hearing your feedback at CIRCL Info, and to you bookmarking the Cyber Learning website and referring to it often, and to advancing the common work we're doing together. So thanks.